Parish District Attorney Jason Williams must indict and issue arrest warrants for the White House ICE henchman Tom Homan and his boss, ICE Director Todd Lyons, and his boss, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, now with 8 action dress-up outfits, and for that matter, for her boss, President Donald Ted Bundy Trump. The charges Attorney General Williams must bring, someone estimated there could be 27 different charges, include kidnapping of a United States citizen, deprivation of 5th and 14th Amendment rights, and child trafficking. Because Trump and Noem and Lyons and Homan and the agents involved, and in fact, the entirety of Trump's government of the undead, by the undead, for the undead, kidnapped a 2-year-old child, a native of this country, a native of Louisiana, a native of New Orleans. And Friday, they deported her, renditioned her, in fact, to Honduras because they were sending her Honduran-born mother there. And the mother allegedly wanted the child with her, although there is mounting circumstantial evidence that this is untrue, that this is a Trump administration lie designed to cover up the fact that somebody disconnected a call from the mother to the child's father as he frantically began to talk about getting lawyers involved. No hearing, no lawyers, no ethics, no responsibility, no morality, no attempt to verify whether a note about the mother's intent written in Spanish was actually written by her or even that it exists. Not even time for the father to talk to the mother for more than 1 minute before Trump's Gestapo broke virtually every law and violated virtually every word of the Constitution. And the toddler, identified only by her initials VML, was not alone. 2 mothers and 3 young children were disappeared out of New Orleans late last week, according to the ACLU of New Orleans. The ACLU says all are U.S. citizens. The ACLU says one of the children, 4 years old, has a rare form of cancer in stage 4, and the child was deported without medical consultation and without their medication. The ACLU says one of the mothers is pregnant. It is child trafficking, Mr. Attorney General. People need to be arrested, Mr. Attorney General. That is your job, sir, and you are a Democrat, therefore you are not a Trump whore. His bullies need to be metaphorically kicked in the groin because the United States of America is now officially kidnapping its own infants, ones born in this country and with the full rights of citizenship, and sending them to foreign countries on hearsay. And you, Mr. Attorney General, are an official of the government of the 53rd largest city in this country, and one of your constituents was just kidnapped. And she's 2 years old, and you, goddamn, better do something about it. Indict them and have them arrested, preferably dragged into court in New Orleans by their feet. More practically, indict them and issue warrants for their arrest, knowing full well that dress-up Barbie Noem won't ever be seen in Louisiana again if you do this, nor will the others. But you can drag in the local ICE goons, and even if the whole thing gets thrown out in 2 hours, you will have at least done something to indicate that democracy is going to fight back. And after we have seen that Trump's fascists are not just fascists, they are worse than we expected, you will show we are not going to continue to roll over as the degenerates in ICE now reportedly go on to a military base and grab a serviceman's immigrant wife while she is on duty at sea, and while the Kilmar Abrego Garcias and the gay hairdressers and the 2-year-old New Orleans girl known by the initials VML and the 4-year-old New Orleans girl with cancer get disappeared like we were living in Chile in 1973. If the Trump administration of Nazi adjacents can make up a law to allow them to walk into a Wisconsin courtroom and arrest a local judge because she would not hand over someone who was there in her courtroom to receive actual American justice, hand that person over to a bunch of armed thugs, then the ICE thugs in New Orleans are fair game for arrest, as is the leadership, as is the preening witch Noem, as is the psychopath at the head of the dictatorship. And whoever arrested the Milwaukee judge should themselves be arrested for obstructing a legal proceeding and menacing an officer of the court. Just consider the raw facts of the abduction of VML as if it were in the prism of inside the Trump cult. An innocent 2-year-old American girl stolen by her Honduran mother and taken to Honduras, and nobody stopped them? They would indict Hillary Clinton. In an America where the judges are subject to arrest by ICE as part of Stephen Miller's paranoid fever dream that we are under attack by anybody, then Noem and Trump and the rest of these shit stains are also subject to arrest as part of a gang, a kidnapping gang, a human trafficking gang. And by the way, obviously the case in New Orleans would be better handled by the Louisiana Attorney General, Liz Muriel, but all you need out of her bio to abandon all hope is former executive counsel to Governor Bobby Jindal. I don't know, Madam Attorney General, surprise me. The judge in the case of VML who tried to stop this horror, who protested this, who publicized this, is Terry Doughty, the chief judge of the U.S. District Court of the Western District of Louisiana, and he is not only a Trump appointee, but he is such a Trump appointee that he wrote that he had become aware independently that by the time he tried to talk to the mother in the case, the plane she was in was already, quote, above the Gulf of America, unquote. Even he gets it. Judge Doughty also scheduled a hearing for 16 May, quote, in the interest of dispelling our strong suspicion that the government just deported a U.S. citizen with no meaningful process. And just for that, tears of gratitude well in my eyes. But no, Trump, don't do anything about the U.S.-born child with cancer you just sent to Honduras without even a hearing. Don't do anything about VML. No, arrest the judge in Wisconsin trying to keep people, any people, I don't give an F where they were born, out of the hands of these sadists you have given uniforms and weapons to. Don't question that, Republican senators. Don't question that, Speaker Mike Closets Johnson. Don't question that, flag-waving imbeciles, kidnapping American babies with cancer and arresting the judges who try to stop such moral cannibalism as you and Trump march towards ethnic cleansing in America. Remember, Republicans, as this unfolds, before the rest of us stop you, your only hope is that all or most of the world's religions are wrong. Because if they are not wrong, you are all going to hell. Of course, as ever, the cruelty, the moral cannibalism, is the point. After Judge Dugan in Milwaukee was arrested, the second-choice Attorney General, the one who, by the Trump terrorists' own definition, is a DEI hire, Pam Bondi, went out and said of America's judges, the backbone of our nation, and the group that includes the shrinking subset of those officials who actually put the law first in this country, Bondi said, quote, they are deranged. She insisted, we are sending a very strong message. We will come after you and we will prosecute you. We will find you. It amazes me even now as I read this that Pam Bondi and the others who have applauded the arrest of one judge and the placing of symbolic crosshairs over the lives of all the other judges in the country, including the ones they like, Bondi and the other idiots have not once considered that the road they are on, the road to complete authoritarianism, where all the judges serve only if they rubber stamp all the Trump commandments, that road goes across countless bridges that may or may not support them, or may not still be there, or may not even exist. What happens to you, Pam Bondi? What happens to you, Kash Patel? What happens to you, Tom Homan, if you don't get to the other side of that goddamned bridge? What is the one thing you are guaranteed to see when Trump falls and America is restored to the United States of America? What is the one thing you will see? A judge. I haven't spent a lot of time in courtrooms in my life, thank goodness, but I did once sue the company part owned by the former Vice President of the United States for the $50 million he and his co-owner owed me. And one of the many pieces of advice one of my lawyers gave me that led to such a gloriously successful outcome there was, don't piss off the judge. But for now, of course, pissing off the judge is Pam Bondi's purpose. The first purpose of her useless, bleached, 56 years long or more life. Pissing them off and, moreover, scaring them. Scaring the judges by arresting one in Wisconsin. Scaring their own staff by firing their senior trade official, George Bogdan, because he went to Miles Taylor's wedding 6 years ago. Scaring political opponents by ordering the investigation of the pro-democracy fundraising outlet Act Blue. Scaring would-be donors to the campaigns of actual American candidates by twisting the fact that Act Blue's site successfully caught and rejected foreign donation attempts and turning that into an international influence plot, as opposed to Trump just taking billions directly in international influence through his companies and the gyrations of the stock market. Scaring those who would defend those persecuted by ICE and the other Trump Brownshirts by having rapacious idiots like Sebastian Gorka claim that defending them is aiding and abetting criminals. Scaring the actual leaders of the opposition party like Representative Ocasio-Cortez by virtually accusing them of the crime of defending the accused and having your own propaganda outlets literally accuse them of that. And scaring those who would speak out against Trump in any way by circling back to that idiot Gorka's claim that to do so is siding with the terrorists. These will fail. These will fail. We will not be scared. We will be enraged. These will fail. And the Bondis and the Noems and the Gorkas will be charged for whatever laws they may have broken. And they will get defense attorneys, and we will not try to prosecute the defense attorneys. And they will get defenders, and we will not try to prosecute those who defend them in public. And they will be charged by the people they are now trying to scare. And they will come before judges. Hopefully, Judge Dugan. I would settle for Judge Doughty. But their real threat here is that in the time before they fail, they will succeed in chilling the debate. Those for whom the consequences can be real and devastating may hesitate to fight back on behalf of justice and the law and the nation. Journalists, in a time of corporate journalistic failure and cowardice and greed. Judges, in a time of political assassination threats by the right. And that other most dangerous group to the far right. 2- and 4-year-old Americans from New Orleans. The Trump terrorism bet is that the hesitation will be enough to give Trump the time to do as much damage to this country as possible, because that is how he should be perceived and reported on. It doesn't matter if he's doing this damage on behalf of another nation. It doesn't matter if he has reached the 1984 stage and decided the object of power is power. It doesn't matter if he's doing it because he's insane. It doesn't matter why he's destroying the nation. It only matters that he is destroying the nation and depending on institutions and individuals that would defend that nation to fold. And if you don't think they will fold, ask Zuckerberg and Bezos and the Washington Post and Columbia University and ABC and Bob Iger and CBS, which is reportedly going to let a mediator judge Trump's lawsuit this week, the one demanding damages because the 60 Minutes interview of Kamala Harris damaged him in the election that he, checks notes, won. It remains irrelevant, but it is explanatory and could be useful. The other possibility that Trump is destroying this nation because those around him are not letting him see the new Associated Press poll where his approval is 39 and his net disapproval is now 19 points underwater, and all the specific policy measures are underwater, and he is instead being told he really is saving this nation, and his semi-human mind seems to be able to process the value of being perceived as savior, that they are telling him these things. Over here in the real world, we call this lying to him, was underscored anew by this batshit crazy interview with Time magazine. I mean, batshit crazy, even in the Trump world of 24/7 batshit crazy. I could parse this for literally weeks. But the Time magazine interview suggests that the primary rule in the new Trump crazy machine is to tell him whatever is likeliest to keep him from yelling at you. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the administration had to facilitate and effectuate the Maryland father's return with a deadline of 3 weeks ago today. Since it has done the exact opposite, Trump was asked by Time magazine if he is therefore disobeying the Supreme Court, which he is. Quote, "That's not what my people told me. They didn't say it was. They said it was. The 9-0 was entirely different." Clearly, they never told him about the facilitate and effectuate part, only that the court did not literally use a phrase like, "We order Trump to bring him back to the United States immediately." These moments of clarity about how they are handling Trump, not clarity from Trump, for God's sakes, they fall from the Time interview like dust falling off the top shelf. Quote, "One final question, Mr. President. You were showing us the new paintings you have behind us. You put all these new portraits. One of them includes John Adams. John Adams said, 'We're a government ruled by laws, not by men.' Do you agree with that?" Trump: "John Adams said that. Where was the painting?" "It's right here." "We're a government ruled by laws, not by men." "Well, I think we're a government ruled by law, but, somebody has to administer the law, so therefore men and women, certainly play a role in it. I wouldn't agree with it 100%. We are a government where men are involved in the process of law, and ideally, you're going to have honest men like me." John Adams said that. Where was the painting? Oh, my God. On the bright side, he seemed to know who John Adams was. Quote, "You were harshly critical of what you called the weaponization of the Justice Department under Biden. You recently signed memos." "Well, sure, but you wouldn't be, if this were Biden, well, first of all, he wouldn't do an interview because he was grossly incompetent." Time, "We spoke to him last year, Mr. President." Trump, "Huh?" Time, "We spoke to him a year ago." Trump, "How did he do?" Trump. You can read the interview yourself. Olbermann, as an aside, I wouldn't bet on that. Trump, not too good. I did read the interview. He didn't do well. He didn't do well at all. He didn't do well at anything. And he cut that interview off to being a matter of minutes, and you weren't asking questions like you're asking me. Rule 1 of Trump, there's always a nemesis. When he has lost, failed, or has no other answer, just bring up the nemesis. When Trump started to go crazy and run for president as revenge, it was against Obama, so everything was Obama. Then he realized sometime during 2016 that he wasn't running against Obama. He was actually running against somebody named Hillary Clinton. Who knew? So everything became Hillary. Then he realized Biden was the front runner for 2020, not Hillary. And since then, especially since he lost to Biden, since Biden humiliated him, and since, therefore, most of Trump is forever frozen in that moment, trying to undo the loss, therefore, nemesis is now Biden. This came up again about Ukraine. You remember his pathetic bleeding at Putin, which didn't work. I'm not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. Not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. Vladimir, stop. So having failed to settle Ukraine in a day, or let's see, counting the 99 of them, he had to blame Biden. Let me parse this next thing for the Biden part and other notable inferences. This is the Truth Social post. Ready? About Ukraine. Quote, "This is Sleepy Joe Biden's war, not mine." All right, well, there's the Biden part already. "It was a loser from day one and should have never happened and wouldn't have happened if I were president at the time. I'm just trying to clean up the mess that was left to me by Obama and Biden, and what a mess it is. With all that being said, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns over the last few days." Even Chuck Grassley had written, "President Trump, please put the toughest of sanctions on Putin. You ought to see from clear evidence that he is playing America as a patsy." Back to the Trump tweet. "It makes me think that maybe Putin doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along." CBS News further shat its pants yesterday, putting the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, a snake, on Face the Nation. Seriously, on Face the Nation. I don't know if that was part of the Sherry Redstone bribe deal with Trump, or if that was Trump's reply from Putin. If Lavrov basically saying, "F you, Trump," was Putin's way of saying, "I didn't like that post," which ended, as you will recall, with him suggesting that maybe Putin has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions. Too many people are dying. This could be, in summation, a setup for Putin to allow Putin to propose his own deal in Ukraine, still utterly unacceptable, but maybe 10% less unacceptable than all of his current demands. Whereupon Trump says he got Putin to make a deal. Oh, and Zelensky rejected it. But ultimately, perhaps the most interesting thing in that entire post, perhaps the most frightening thing in that entire post, perhaps the most revelatory thing in that entire post is that one phrase in there. Makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along. I am 13 years younger than Trump, but I am from the same metropolitan area. The generation before me grew up here as his generation before him did. I went to a private school that played sports against the military school they were forced to send him to, instead of the juvie home, juvenile detention home. I went to an Ivy League university as he did, and for vastly different reasons. I probably actually went to fewer classes than he did. In my defense, I graduated in 7 semesters. Also, I cut a lot. And, like him, I have lived in New York or the immediate suburbs for roughly 53 years, including the last 24 uninterruptedly. I have also studied and loved language and slang and slanguage for the whole of my life, and I have never before heard the phrase, "He's just tapping me along." Nor can I find any reference to it anywhere. I thought, well, maybe that's a British expression. It is not. Maybe it translates from the German or the Russian. It does not. I mean, it could be a regional variant specific to Jamaica Estates in Queens, New York. It could be a variant of the slang meaning of tapping. Tapping is a little sleeker sounding version of boinking and related terms, but I don't know. I've never heard this phrase before. There's no evidence, if you do a search for it, that anybody has ever used this phrase before. I mean, anybody. Maybe it's pre-internet. Maybe it's a famous phrase from Queens in 1957. But he writes it with the same confidence that everybody knows what he means, in which he writes all his otherwise simple, childish communications. There is no doubt in his own, quote, mind, unquote, that everybody knows. Everybody says 10 times a day, he's just tapping me along. Martha, you're just tapping me along. You're just tapping me along, officer. I think, and I will, so far unsuccessfully, hold my glee until this is confirmed, that Trump has, in fact, manufactured this phrase inside his disordered, damaged mind. If you remember, Covfefe, C-O-V-F-E-F-E, was a major typo, or maybe narcolepsy, or maybe he was typing it out on Twitter, slipped, fell, his head hit send, the end. But tapping me along, that's from a language only Trump has ever heard. I think his illness or injury or malformation or whatever it is might have just reached the stage where he is making up his own words. Speaking in tongues, personal neologism, aphasia, accelerating mental or intellectual malfunction. You know, that moment when your brain starts tapping you along. I have once been in the company of a relative who was suffering from an acute attack of bipolarity and began to make up his own words. It is one of the more terrifying things to have ever witnessed. And even he did not say, "You're just tapping me along." Headlines on day 99 of America held hostage the Trump dictatorship. If the Canadian Liberals beat the Conservatives in the election today, remember to thank Trump and thank the fact that the creepy Conservative candidate has some kind of weird iguana thing going where he can't fully open his eyes. In the MAGA answer to the White House Correspondents' Dinner Saturday, like you needed to answer that, the scum drank cocktails with what passes for witty names in their world. None of them were named just tapping me along, although I would have given them credit for doing that. One of the drinks was called Leakers and Liars, meaning the MAGA were drinking what happens when you take a leak. Fitting. And yes, Trump fell asleep at the Pope's funeral, upright, on camera, with his rubbery lips beginning to slide apart. And this week's Melania did not wake him. Well, given the choice, would you? Also of interest here in this all-new edition, Bill Maher comes back at Larry David, saying Larry's implication that going to the White House for dinner with Trump was like going to the old chancellery for dinner with Hitler. Bill says you should never invoke Hitler, and says Larry had insulted 6 million dead Jews, which might be an answer if Bill Maher had not made the exact same comparison on his own show in 2015. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on this all-new edition of Countdown, somebody wrote something in fond remembrance of Dr. Carl Sagan the other day, and it reminded me, and I had forgotten about this, that 47 years ago last week, he won the Pulitzer Prize. And when our radio station at Cornell called him on the off chance he'd do an interview with us, since he was also at Cornell, he said, yes, but only if it's with your sportscaster, Keith. I was 19, totally unknown, and he became the first famous person I ever interviewed. Why he asked for me, explained, next in Things I Promise Not to Tell. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute the latest other worst persons in the cosmos, world. Let me dedicate this to Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. They are talking about promoting her to a cabinet position. I do not think it is a coincidence that this is because, perhaps, her first name contains the letters of the word lie, and her last name contains the letters of the word lie. Here's a tip to the news network. Stop airing her so-called press briefings live, exceeding even the Sean Spicers and Dana Perinos of this world. She is lying well over half the time. It is pure propaganda and racism and idiotic and moral cannibalism, as I suggested earlier. Kudos to the BBC, which after 90-plus days of carrying these things live, seems to have figured out this whole idea and now just replays later on anything she says that is either relevant or true. It's usually about a 12-second clip. The domestic networks continue to run it live, at least on occasion, because it is the cheapest possible live programming. And in, say, MSNBC's case, do you prefer this or 45 minutes of Katie Tur? I have already submitted my answer to the judges. Anyway, the bronze, worse, it goes to Trump, President Scrooge McDuck himself. He does something stupid or cheap or both, and his stupid, cheap supporters go crazy over it. He's installing 2 100-foot flagpoles at the White House to further ruin the landscaping. For all I know, he intends to put them one atop the other. But he's paying for them himself. Oh boy, say the talking skunks of Trumpsboro, Oklahoma. He's paying for them big flagpoles himself. That must be billions. Even a 100-foot flagpole sells for only $29,000 retail. So President Scrooge McDuck is shelling out 58 grand. Wow. Big spender. If he ever pays the bill. Listen, a 100-foot flagpole company of Alexandria, Virginia, or wherever, get it in cash up front. I'm just saying. Maybe Kristi Noem and 8 action dress-up sets. Maybe she has it in cash, in her wallet, in her bag. The runner-up, worser, Ed Martin, nominee for Gulag Meister of the Capitol Military District, nominee for U.S. Attorney in D.C. and serving now as acting U.S. Attorney in D.C. Let me just read this headline about Ed from the Jewish Forward. Quote, exclusive, Trump nominee apologizes for praising Nazi sympathizer while awaiting Senate confirmation hearing. U.S. Attorney pick Ed Martin said he was unaware of Timothy Hale Cusinelli's views and white supremacist ties, which he now denounces. That headline, Trump nominee apologizes for praising Nazi sympathizer while awaiting Senate confirmation hearing. But did he do it in the hallway? By the way, I'd like to apologize. I have to go in here in a minute, but I'd like to apologize. That's a headline. New York Times. One of the keys to never letting on that you are one of the baddies is to never ask any questions about the other baddies, nor believe any of the answers that you are avoiding in the first place. This guy, Hale Cusinelli, that Ed Martin first praised, then denounced while awaiting confirmation, then said he knew nothing about him, that's the stupid-looking kid who tried to pose on the internet as Hitler with the little mustache and the hair combed that way and the hand at his chest. But instead of looking tough or like a candidate for the Trump cabinet, he just wound up looking like one of the rejected actors in The Producers. And he might sink Ed Martin. Good work, baby Dolph. But our winner, same topic yet again, Bill Maher. Another way to avoid the consequences for doing something really, really, really stupid is to change the narrative and pull a bit of whataboutism against your critic. Maher went back on the air and dragged Al Gore, for whom I worked, the living definition of the cliche, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, dragged Gore into defending Maher's dinner with Herr Trump. Maher also attacked Larry David for his soon-to-be Pulitzer Prize-winning satire My Dinner with Adolf by trying to make Larry appear like he's an anti-Semite. No offense, Larry, but Bill would have more success trying to make you appear like you're a Boston Red Sox fan. In an interview with Piers Morgan, which I assume Bill did just in case he had not destroyed his career by going to have dinner with Trump, Maher said of Larry's epic evisceration of him, quote, first of all, it's kind of insulting to 6 million dead Jews. It's an argument you kind of lost just to start it. Look, maybe it's not completely logically fair, but Hitler has really kind of got to stay in his own place. He is the goat of evil. We're just going to have to leave it like that. I don't want to make it constantly personal with me and Larry. We might be friends again. Bill doesn't want to make that constantly personal, but he just accused Larry David of insulting 6 million dead Jews because that's not personal, it's comedy? Quoting again, I can take a shot, and I can also take it when people disagree with me. That's not exactly the way I would have done it. Again, the irony, let's go back to what my original thing was. There's got to be a better way than hurling insults and not talking to people. If I can talk to Trump, I can talk to Larry David, too. Wait. You don't want to hurl insults, so you said Larry was insulting 6 million dead Jews? That's not an insult. That's not personal, it's not an insult. It's comedy gold! Another quote, this wasn't my favorite moment of our friendship. I think the minute you play the Hitler card, you've lost the argument. Come on, man. Hitler, Nazis. Ahem! From the transcript of HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, the 18th of September, 2015, in which Bill Maher says, quote, I try to resist comparisons to Hitler because there's only one Hitler. He broke them all. But you know what? If you're stirring up xenophobic hate among an angry, humiliated population and talking about rounding up minorities, it's a little Hitler adjacent. Talking about Trump. And if you say, oh, he didn't compare Trump to Hitler 10 years ago, he just called him Hitler adjacent, that's not comparing him. And then he responded to Larry by saying, I think the minute you play the Hitler card, you've lost the argument. If you think those are not exact matches, from the transcript of HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher 3 weeks earlier, August 28th, 2015, Bill Maher talks about Trump's rhetoric about China. Again, this is nearly a decade ago. The anniversary party at the Bill Maher set will be August 28th of this year. On the show on August 28th, 2015, Maher says, quote, that's the way Hitler talked about the Jews. See, as Bill has just demonstrated, yet another way to avoid the consequences for doing something really, really, really stupid is to have completely forgotten you did the exact same thing yourself on your own show in 2015. Bill, I know you claim to have done a lot of drugs, but that much drugs you don't remember 2015? Bill, when somebody else compares Trump to Hitler, they've immediately lost the argument and insulted 6 million dead Jews. But when I compare Trump to Hitler, it's avant-garde, edgy humor. Look how far ahead of the curve I was. Maher, today's other worst person in the world! To the number one story on the countdown, and a change in mood and a quick break. And the other day, somebody mentioned the work of Dr. Carl Sagan. The name may ring a bell. At one point, Carl Sagan was easily the most famous scientist in America, up there with Dr. Salk of the vaccine, up there with Freud. You name the scientist, Carl Sagan was probably more famous because Carl Sagan was on TV every couple of weeks. He was also, and that was the joke, he was also a professor of astronomy and related sciences at Cornell University. When I was a student there, I did not take his course. I suppose I could have gotten into it. As it turned out, he knew who I was. I'll get to that story in a moment. This is about interviewing Carl Sagan. I have interviewed a lot of famous people, and I don't think of myself as a good interviewer. I don't think of myself as an interviewer. I have to do it, and I used to do 3 or 4 interviews a night on my television shows, but I've never been comfortable doing it. I often don't have any questions. I'm often not interested in what the guest has to say. That's why there has never been an actual guest here on this podcast. I will break this precedent someday. We are approaching the 3rd anniversary as I record this, but I haven't done it yet, have I? Also, it's easier if it's just you. Then you can say at the end of it, all of it was my fault. I've interviewed, as it turns out, 6 presidents, none of them while they were president, either before or after. And for a long time, I used to say that my first president was Ronald Reagan, who I interviewed in 1992 on radio for ESPN about a football player who'd suffered a damaging injury and a neck contusion that left him thankfully, briefly paralyzed. And the head of ESPN radio was not that sophisticated sports fan who thought that we could appeal to a non-sports audience on sports stations around the country on the weekends by having Ronald Reagan on. You forget in the context of the time, 1992, Ronald Reagan got elected, yes, because he was a reactionary governor from California, and he'd been governor 2 times there. And yes, he was a famous TV guy who hosted a rather low-grade TV show that appealed to low-grade people. And he was only the first of 2 presidents who could be said to have done that. And he was a sportscaster, and he was an iconic figure from a couple of sports movies. The one about the Gipper. The Gipper is from a sports movie. It's complete nonsense, the story about the dying player George Gipp, but it gave him a sports context. So I interviewed Ronald Reagan, and I had to tell the story in my questions so he knew what I was talking about. That's 1992. He'd only been out of office 3 years, and he was already in significant decline that I had to help him in the interview. Fortunately, it was pre-recorded. I interviewed, though, as it turned out, and I've told the story and don't want to go through it again, I interviewed Trump in 1983, and I will recall this part of it and tell it to you again, that the cameraman on that shoot, I ran into him maybe in 2016 or 17 after not seeing him for decades. And he said, remember when we interviewed that guy? And I went, sure do. He goes, remember what you said after we did the interview? And I went, no. He said, well, we were walking back to the truck and you didn't say anything. And we were really worried because that wasn't you. You always said something all the time. I went, yeah, that's me. And he said, when we got back to the truck, you finally set down the sticks, the tripod, which I was carrying, and he said, you said, what the F was wrong with that guy? And that's all you said. Got that one right. I later interviewed in order Obama when he declared his candidacy, or just before he declared his candidacy in 2006. He was a live guest on Countdown. Obama and Biden at a Democratic semi-debate in 2007. Biden separately during the campaign in 2008. I interviewed Bill Clinton several times in 2006, 7, 8, and I think 10. And Jimmy Carter, I met at the Democratic National Convention in 2008 and interviewed him, the first of many times. And as I've mentioned with great pride, the late Jimmy Carter was a Countdown junkie. He and his family used to watch every night and would rearrange their schedules and sometimes DVR the show so they could all watch at the same time. And they would often pause it during the commercials so they could have group discussions with people who weren't with them about what they'd just heard. If you ever need reassurance that you know what you're doing, take it from Jimmy Carter. I vaguely and viscerally understand why the people at Fox News line up and Newsmax and the others line up and so desperately respond to Trump's support and recognition of them. I understand it in a visceral sense. There is a certain element of egotism involved in this. I felt it myself, about 100% or so. I've interviewed countless actors and actresses and movie stars and comedians, and George Carlin, my personal, I don't know that he's the most famous person I ever interviewed. But I interviewed Robert Redford once, and he was a viewer, and the indescribable happened. We're having a great conversation about the environment. Robert Redford is at his home in Colorado, and we're coming towards the end of the show at 9 o'clock, and he's answering, and he goes, excuse me? And I hadn't said anything. Did somebody say rap? The producer, who I know her name, but I'll leave her out of this. The producer actually got in Robert Redford's ear during his final answer, and rather than let him go 30 seconds long so that the show would bleed over into the 9 o'clock hour, she tried to get Robert Redford to shut up. Otherwise, a great interview. And all the athletes. Ali, 3 times, I think. Mickey Mantle, I've told that story. The interview that ended with the comment that he made about how if he'd known he was going to live, he would have done better and tried harder. And I said, you did pretty well. And he said, with the most remorse I ever heard anybody say anything, I could have done more. Oh, my goodness. And I knew when I did that interview at Christmas time, 1985, that would be the last soundbite in the obituary I would do for him whenever he passed. And it was a decade later. Willie Mays, who answered the phone in the voice of his own housekeeper, straight out of Gone with the Wind. He did an impression of Hattie McDaniel. I will not repeat it, and one of the greatest regrets I ever had was that radio interview. I used to follow the old rules, which is don't record till they tell you it's okay. So I did not record him answering the phone. Everybody else would hit play and record while the phone was ringing. I waited until he said it was okay. And I missed having a copy of Willie Mays as Hattie McDaniel, as his own maid, and then dropping out of that voice in mid-sentence and going, this is Willie. Ted Williams, I interviewed in Boston. I mentioned Ali. I once had to do Ali on the radio, and I had to basically repeat what he was saying. And Ali nodded along like I got that right. And I actually saw him several times thereafter, and we had friendly conversations, one of which he never actually said anything out loud. I just sort of heard him, I think, through ESP, and I don't believe in ESPA, but if it happened in any context, that was the time it happened. So I've done a lot of interviews. But to this day, the most famous person I ever interviewed, relative certainly to myself, was Dr. Carl Sagan. The Cosmos series in the early 80s was one of the first American-created, in-depth, serious, and entertaining scientific series in television history. It was one of the most popular shows in television, even though it was not on NBC, ABC, or CBS. It was on PBS. It made Carl Sagan, who was already a kind of glib and TV-genic guy, it made him into a superstar who appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson every couple of weeks. That was the joke. In the late 70s at Cornell, it was, yes, Dr. Carl Sagan, the head of the astronomy department at The Tonight Show, who visits us here in his satellite office in Ithaca, New York. Well, that's what we all thought about. I didn't take the class. I'd taken an astronomy class in high school, and I could not shake the reality that as great as it was, taught by one of my favorite high school teachers, a man named Randy McNaughton, the class started, if I remember correctly, at 11:25 a.m. And the first thing he would do would be shut off the lights. And this is a bunch of kids who probably didn't eat a big breakfast, including me, who were waiting for lunch. I don't know how many times I fell asleep during that class, not because it was bad, but it was because I was so hungry. I was basically briefly starving. You wouldn't know what to look at me, but I was. And I just didn't want to take it. And knowing me at the time, you know, I wasn't going to take a tough course. What's the point of that? I'm here to get the degree. So in any event, I went and looked this up. It was Monday, April 17th, 1978, and I was at WVBR at Cornell in late afternoon preparing my sportscast in our big-time 30-minute world newscast and that we did every day, and it was a pretty good newscast. World Report, and I did the sportscast most nights as the sports director of the station, and I'm just sitting there looking at the wire copy and looking at the local news that we might put in the sportscast, and it was an ordinary day at the beginning of spring, this time of year in 1978. I was 19 years old, didn't have aspirations to do anything other than sports. I had done news for the station. I had done live reporting for the station in news and in sports, but I didn't have any aspirations to be an interviewer or anything else. When the newscaster on duty that day says, "Are you up for interviewing Carl Sagan? He just won the Pulitzer Prize." And I went, "Sure, and get President Carter on the phone like he'd do an interview with me." No, we're serious." And I said, "What do you mean you're serious?" "Well, he just won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction." I said, "Well, good for him." And we just called his office, just to see if he'd do an interview. And he said, "I'll do an interview, but it must be live. And is your sportscaster there today?" And, we went, "What, our sportscaster?" "Yes, Keith, is he in the studio?" "I like him. He seems to get it." That was what I was told Carl Sagan said. And they relate this to me, and I went, "Oh, come on." He goes, "No, apparently he listens to the station all the time. He loves the rock and roll, and he likes you doing the sports. He says he's not a big sports fan, but he enjoys your work." Well, again, I can't possibly describe how much space there was between us in terms of renown. I was, in April 1978, a year and 3 months away from getting my first paycheck for my first full-time job in broadcasting, which would pay me at an annual rate of $16,500. I had not made $10,000 in broadcasting in my entire life to this point. I was pretty well known at the radio station. There were occasionally, maybe once every other month, fan letters, but literally the pile of them was less than 10 high in my entire career. I'd been paid to cover Cornell football games by United Press International for $15 a game, and trust me, I was underpaid, but it was pretty good money. $15 to go watch that. Ugh. But Carl Sagan knew Johnny Carson, was on his show all the time, had done not just the Cosmos series, but series after series for PBS, follow-ups. They sold, in those early days, they sold bootleg copies of Cosmos, which would appear, I guess, in 1980. So he was already famous before Cosmos when this story takes place, and he'd done countless shows for PBS already. And as I said, on The Tonight Show all the time, joking about the origins of the universe. And he wanted to do an interview only with me and only live. And I said, well, when are we going to do it? As soon as you get in the booth, he's on hold. So one of the things I did discover in that moment of what should have been panic was a sense of calm, which was, okay, he won the Pulitzer Prize. What's the name of the book? Something about dragons? The book was called The Dragons of Eden, Speculations on the Evolution of Human Intelligence. This was not his forte. His forte was the cosmos. But Carl Sagan had won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction. And his first interview, as it turned out, he hadn't called anybody else back yet. He hadn't called the Associated Press or CBS News. He wanted to talk to Keith Olbermann, the 19-year-old sportscaster who he'd never met and, in fact, would never meet. And I got in the booth, and they dropped a record, and whoever was the disc jockey said, we have some breaking news. Dr. Carl Sagan of Cornell has won a Pulitzer Prize. Keith Olbermann is here with an interview with him live on WVBR. And I went, yes, I am. Dr. Sagan, are you there? Yes, I am, Keith. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And he sounded excited by talking to me. And I then learned the other lesson, which is there is a possibility that you are as big a deal to the interviewee as he is to you, as unlikely as this fame gradient would have suggested. And it's still, to me, as I said, it's bigger than me interviewing Muhammad Ali, because I was a professional in a field that was much smaller than it is now. And I was with the worldwide cable news network, CNN. I had some chops. This was basically Carl Sagan being interviewed by somebody who could have been a kid in his class, but wasn't, on his favorite radio station. I would have assumed that would have been, I don't know, KMET in Los Angeles or something, or at least KNX. So we talked about this, and I said, what do you think the impact is on our understanding of human evolution and the intelligence evolution of you winning a book that now will have a Pulitzer Prize sticker on it and be sold to people who don't know anything about it, but just you're buying it because it says Pulitzer Prize? And he brayed with laughter. He went, yeah, that was the first thing I thought of. Obviously, it's going to make me some more money, but my God, how many people will now read this book just because it won this stupid prize? And he said he was shocked that it won this because he thought it was a good book and he enjoyed talking about the subject, but he'd never really seriously considered it until he'd been asked to talk about it a few years before, I think at the University of Toronto, and he went off on a riff and went, I should study this and try to find out would this make a good show? And this was part of the thing that, I guess, generated the big picture idea of cosmos and the evolution of the universe leading to the evolution of man, and the evolution of man being dependent on the evolution of his own intelligence. So we must have gone on for 10 minutes. And he was charming and funny and self-deprecating. And I saw immediately that as good an interviewer as Johnny Carson was, the key ingredient in the joyfulness and the fun of the Johnny Carson interviews with Carl Sagan was not some sort of great preparation on Johnny Carson's part, not some sort of great level of experience on Johnny Carson's part, but the fact that Carl Sagan liked to talk and was open and funny and listened to the questions carefully and said things that were almost designed to let you come up with a follow-up question. That was when I realized that one of the greatest processes for doing a good interview is to not have an awful lot of time to prepare for it, to have maybe no more than 2 or 3 questions in mind that you can jot down in case you freeze. This will force you to listen to what the other guy is saying and then say, tell me more about that. This fascinates me. Whether or not it fascinates you is irrelevant. He wants to talk about it. He just told you so. So at the end of this interview, I said, congratulations again and on everything, and please give my regards. I don't know why I said this. Please give my regards to Johnny Carson the next time you are out there. This is one of the great ambitions of my life, to be on The Tonight Show. Well, I'll see if I can arrange for you to be a guest. Ha, 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 ho, ho, ho. I was a guest on The Tonight Show 25 years later, like to the day. It wasn't Johnny Carson, but it was still The Tonight Show. But the punchline to this is, having discovered that one of the most famous professors at any American university in the late 20th century, maybe in the whole of the 20th century, Carl Sagan, one of the pioneers of cosmetics, cosmetology, one of the guys who mainstreamed the whole idea of the Big Bang, one of the people who brought everything from physics to creationism together in one unified TV shtick, was a fan of mine. Having discovered this, having seen this, and knowing that his course was majors only, except by professor's permission, do you think I went to him or called his office as I approached my last 2 semesters at Cornell in the fall of 1978 and spring of 1979 and said, hey, I'd love to take the course. Can't you have room for one more? I'll sit in the back. Do you think I did that? Having had, by the way, in case I was worried about whether or not I'd pass, I now had a personal relationship with the professor. I was his favorite sportscaster. I was his favorite person at the Cornell radio station. I was the only person he'd do the interview with. He didn't want to talk to the newscaster. He wanted to talk to me. And when, by the way, I asked him about the other condition, that it be live, I said, can I use parts of this again later in an edited form so we can run the whole thing again, but I'd like to use, oh, of course, it's you. You did a great job. Oh, my goodness. And of course, what would you do? That's 4 credits sitting out there, even on the most basic, greedy, selfish level imaginable. 4 gut credits with Dr. Carl Sagan. Do you think I scheduled the course? No. Can you guess why I did not schedule the course? When I needed, by the way, wherever he fit into this, I had leftover requirements in the agriculture college, in physics, in biology, and and chemistry. Those 3 areas, I needed 4 more credits in each of them. Do you think I took the course? No. And the answer to why I did not take the course and did not ever meet Dr. Carl Sagan, my fan. The course met at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't want to get up that early. Still true. You make crazy decisions when you're 19 years old and just trying to get out of Cornell in 7 semesters. What can I tell you? I've done all the damage I can do here. I am remorseful that I never met him, though. Thanks for listening. Brian Ray and John Philip Chenale, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chenale handled orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever in the cosmos, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was the eternal universal traveler, my friend Stevie Van Zandt. Wondering why there's no tape of me interviewing Dr. Sagan? I couldn't find it. It's there somewhere. Everything else was, as ever, my fault. My fault, and Carl Sagan's for encouraging me. That's Countdown for today, day 99 of America Held Hostage. Just 1,364 days until the scheduled end of his lame duck and lame-brained term, unless Musk removes him sooner, or the actuarial tables do, or the attorneys general do. The next scheduled countdown is Thursday. As always, bulletins as the news warrants. Remember, impeach Trump. It will not work now. It will, however, win the Democrats the midterms, if there are midterms. And I want polling on a presidential recall vote. Let's put some pressure on here, even if you can't have a presidential recall vote. Till next time, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.